Thank you for joining us. I'm Don Hubin, the Director of the Center for Ethics and Human Values. When we were asked to organize this morning's panel, we were delighted to do so because just a year ago, we ran a year-long program focused on various dimensions of inequality. And of course, access to higher education is both a reflection of social and economic inequalities, but it's also the key to ameliorating those inequalities as well. And the program that we're here to discuss today is aimed at providing greater access and affordability to low and moderate income students. So we're going to be very brief in the introductions this morning because we have a small time to talk here. So I want to, everyone in the room, of course, knows President Michael V. Drake of The Ohio State University. Some of you who were here about the turn of the century will recall William Brit Kirwan, who was president of Ohio State then and went on to be the chancellor of the University System of Maryland.
Can we have a round of applause for President Kirwan? Good to have you back.
So welcome back, Brit. It's great to see you. And on your right is President Sean Decatur of Kenyon University. Moderating the discussion
I'm sorry, I want to pause for a second and
okay.
a round of applause.
And how about for the president?
Moderating the discussion will be Beth Hume, the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Studies and Dean of Undergraduate Education. We're going to reserve about 10 minutes at the end for questions and answers, so be thinking of questions you might want to ask the panel. And without any further ado, let's get started. Thank you.
Great, thank you. ATI's primary goal is to collectively enroll an additional 50,000 lower-income students by 2025. President Drake, could you tell us why this goal is so important to you?
Great. Well, first, nice to see everyone here this morning, and this is a very important topic, a very important opportunity, I think, for all of us here and for the country. And actually, I became involved in this particular discussion the real involvement for me was January 2015, when there was no ATI per se. There was an idea and a collection of discussions that had been organized by the Aspen Institute and Ithaca. And Brit called me and asked if I would join that conversation, and that was great. And it was a wonderful conversation that we had just after graduation in 2015. And then we kept the conversation going during the summer. And then a few of us sort of broke off into a group of whatever, malcontents. I'm sorry, planning group. I was going to say malcontents. But and then had much more intensive conversations. Dan Porterfield was very involved and had been with Aspen. He actually had been with the Aspen discussions early on, and now is going to be the leader of the Aspen Institute. He's the president of Franklin and Marshall for a few more weeks. And then those discussions then got larger. Why is this an important initiative? So there was a lot of research, but particularly some research in around 2010, 2012, found that there were estimates, approximately 50,000 lower and moderate income students in the country who had the grades and test scores of students who were admitted to and successful in the most competitive universities in the country, but for whatever reason were either not in college at all or were undermatched, meaning they were at colleges that gave them a lower chance of being successful. And if you looked at the most successful colleges in the country, and this was for the research, the researchers defined this line, and that line was 70% six-year graduation. So the more successful colleges were those that had a 70% or higher six-year graduation rate, and then the other colleges all had a lower than 70% six-year graduation rate. And I was actually, in the initial discussion, I was surprised to learn that 9% of the colleges and universities in the country had a six-year graduation rate above 70%, and that 91% were below. So the group that we were talking to was this 9% that were above 70%. And when you looked at that group above 70%, and you looked at the economic breakdown of the students in those colleges and universities, one found that about 85% of those students, but at that time about 85%, were from the upper half of the income distribution. And it didn't seem to us, and didn't seem to anyone, that talent and initiative and intelligence and drive and all of those things were divided in that same ratio, that 15% of the thoughtful, smart, hardworking young people were in the lower half of the income distribution when they were 5 or 10 years old, and 85% were in the upper half. But if you got to college, that was really the split that we saw. So the initiative was to draw together leaders of universities. It's a president and chancellor-led initiative to draw together those leaders to have each of their universities commit to increasing the percentage of students from the lower half of the income distribution, so that nationally there's a better balance. And the ultimate goal is by 2025, that's the target year, to have created 50,000 more slots in those universities, corresponding to the 50,000 students who in 2012 were out there in the country qualified but not attending those universities. So it's very, very important to make sure that we are making opportunity available across zip codes and income bands, and so the best and brightest and hardest working people can have the best chance of being successful.
Thank you. Thank you. President Kirwan, President Decatur, would either of you like to add anything about why this initiative is so important to you?
Well, I'll start and let President Decatur add on to this. This has been an issue that I have thought a lot about over the last decade or so, and I think it is really the civil rights issue of our time, providing better access to high-quality education for low-income students. And just in the course of my responsibilities, I began studying what's happening in our society and why is this dynamic at work. And I thought back to my days when, I think the audience will find this hard to believe, but I graduated from high school in 1956. Can you believe someone sitting at this table could have graduated from high school in 1956? Well, when I graduated, my wife and I went off to college, and many of our best friends didn't. They went right into the workforce, and they got good jobs. We went back to our 50th high school reunion. In truth, we've been to our 60th as well, but let that go. We went back to our 50th high school reunion, and all those high school friends who had gone straight into the workforce were retired and living in Florida. And there I was still working. And that was the America back then. And what has happened over time, of course, is that the nature of our economy has changed so dramatically. And there just aren't those kinds of jobs for people when they come out of high school. There are not nearly enough of them. And so all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but over time, achieving the American dream now has an added condition. You got to have a college degree, at least for most folks. And then I started looking at the data, and it is really alarming. Only 10% of young people in the lowest quartile of income earn a college degree. Now think about that for a moment. What are those other 90%? What kind of life are they going to have? And this isn't the America we think, that we've grown up in and think of our country. So all of this, one other thing that weighed on my mind so much, I saw data that says a high-ability, low-income student goes and gets a degree at about the same rate as a low-ability, high-income student. What a waste of talent in our country. So all of this was, swirling in my head, very troubled by it, and I got a call from Josh Weiner at the Aspen Institute to talk a little bit about this initiative. So I give enormous credit to Michael Bloomberg, because his philanthropies, they saw what the consequences are for America if we don't address this problem. So he gave money to the Aspen Institute to develop a strategy to try to address this problem. So a group of us came together to begin thinking about how could we build an initiative that would begin to address this problem. And when, as we were working along, I thought, well, the man that needs to be here helping us is my friend Michael Drake. So I got on the phone and got Michael, and boy, he was on it like immediately. So anyway, that's kind of a rambling sense of how I got involved in this initiative, why I think it's so important. And really, I think there's just so much at stake for our country if we don't address this issue. And that's why I'm so pleased that Michael and others are carrying forward this, what I think is a very important initiative.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
President Decatur, would you like to add anything?
Yes, and first I'd like to thank President Drake for the invitation to join in this panel this morning. For me, what was compelling, there are two things that were compelling about the American Talent Initiative. You know, the first, I think my colleagues on the panel have already mentioned that this is very clearly a larger issue about opportunity and access and larger change in our country, and that the addressing the issue of finding pathways, creating pathways for talented low-income students to not only attend college, but to thrive at college and to do well after graduation is something that is, I think, a real imperative for all of us. But the second thing that attracted me about this project in particular, and President Drake alluded to this, is the focus on institutions with high graduation rates. And that's critical because, you know, when you look at data about student success and pathways after graduation and where graduates go on, whether to jobs or professional schools or long-term trajectory, graduation rate is really of the institution is kind of the critical indicator that, you know, if you have high-performing students that go to schools with high graduation rates, they actually do well on the other end. If you have high-performing students who go to schools with lower graduation rates, those students actually don't do as well, even though they're the input coming in, you'd expect similar outcomes on the other side. I think that there are a lot of things that are tied up in that, and there are research that's looked at things like the effect of expectations in different types of institutions, the effect of resources at different types of institutions. But setting aside the analysis of what underlies that, the bottom line is that institutions that succeed in graduating all students at a high rate are the students where are the institutions where students are most likely to be successful. And when we think about creating opportunity for high-performing students from you know, sort of low-income families, it's important not just to think about creating opportunity to go to college, but to go to college in a place that's going to be most challenging, most able to move on to success. And so the idea of bringing those institutions together to make this commitment is, I think, particularly powerful.
Great, thank you. So you just touched on the idea of universities working together. So could one or more of you talk to us about the benefits of ATI universities working together and some of the best practices that you've observed and learned from this initiative?
Sure. I'd start, and you know, so Kenyon joined ATI about a year ago, and you know, one of the things that's unique about the gathering of presidents, and I guess I've now been to two of these sort of convenings of presidents of institutions, is the range of size and type of institution that's represented. So Kenyon is a small private residential liberal arts college. We have about 1,700 students. In many ways, a very different type of institution from Ohio State in terms of size and scale and breadth of programs. But we have a shared commitment to this idea of opportunity and access. And it's actually a lot to be learned from institutions of very different, who are approaching this, you know, from very different places and very different sizes, very different types of institutions. And it's rare that you get that mix of people together in the same room having a conversation about a shared goal. And so for me, that's been a very powerful part of this, that there are opportunities that bridge, and opportunities to learn and share practices that bridge Kenyon and Ohio State that otherwise, I think, without this type of convening and bringing together under the umbrella of this initiative, we wouldn't be able to recognize.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, I'll make a comment. And again, all of us are a part of a variety of associations. Brit and I worked both in AAU and APLU at different times, and they're just a great variety of organizations of like-minded colleges that focus, and that's terrific. There's nothing like ATI. Sean said that, gosh, it's not so common that schools like Ohio State and Kenyon are in a group where we're doing things at the same time. It's actually never happened before that there's been a collection of universities like the 100 who were with us in New York at Bloomberg headquarters a couple of months ago were there. So we had schools as small as Caltech, as large as Ohio State. We had Spelman, Michigan, Texas, Washington, Harvard, Princeton, a great group of universities, all of whom knew each other, but had never been in a room together working on the same thing together across the higher education sector from north to south, east, west, public, private, large, small. So it was quite a great coming together of a central and aligned focus. Because I think there was great energy in the room and a great chance for synergies and learning and best practices that came from picking one central goal that everyone could focus on and then bringing together people from all over the country. Actually, I was at my table. There were universities that I'd never heard of, just never heard of in my life, didn't know they existed, that I was now in a conversation with. And they were there with places that they'd maybe heard of but never worked with before. And I think it was a wonderful thing for us to see. I'm going to give two quick examples of things that I've learned from our association that I hope have been helpful, just kind of examples of what it's like to have the conversations. On the steering committee now, we have, so as Brit mentioned, I'm on the steering committee. Brit has moved to the next phase, but along with Chris Eisgruber from Princeton, Dan Porterfield from Franklin and Marshall, Carol Quinlan from Davidson, and Anna Marie Cossi from the University of Washington. And we happened to have a conference call last night. We have one every month. And one of the things Anna Marie said, I said Anna Marie, I always say that it's Anna Marie. There's no E, and I have to say Anna Marie, excuse me, for the recording, Anna Marie. But Anna Marie mentioned that at Washington they have two student commencement speakers, one who came to the Seattle campus as a freshman and another who was a transfer student. Or came from some other place, because the community, at graduation time, there are thousands of people who are graduating who had their freshman year or their freshman and sophomore year someplace else, but they become a part of the community and graduate together. But those voices tend not to be heard in the picking of the senior student to speak on behalf of the class. That tends to be someone who was there as a freshman and was integrated in the freshman experience early on. It sounded like a great idea. So on Sunday, all of you who I hope are joining us in the SHU, we'll have two student speakers, one who began here as a freshman, one who transferred into the Ohio State University, and they're leaving together as Buckeyes. And I think it gives representation to a larger part of our community and something that it seemed like a good idea and a best practice. And I leave that as just a tiny example, and the idea there'll be 100 of those that will apply in different ways to different universities and help us all to be the best we can be.
If I could just add, from the very outset in thinking about ATI and how it would work, there was this notion that we have these great institutions with fabulous faculty, and research would be done on what works. How can we improve our capacity, our ability to serve low-income students, and that white papers would be produced so we could all learn, all the members of ATI could learn about new strategies. And when you think about it, it's not just, okay, we want to serve more low-income students. You have to think about the fact that, first of all, so often these students are attending high schools where institutions don't normally go to recruit students. So there's a whole recruiting aspect to this. Secondly, there are financial aid, huge issue, the distribution of your financial aid. What is the most effective way to distribute a financial aid in order to maximize the opportunity and success of these students? And, it's a hard thing to say, but it isn't so easy. Most of these high-performing institutions tend to have served and are populated by middle-class and upper-middle-class students. You're bringing students who've lived in a different environment onto the campus. So the campus has to think about how they can be made to feel welcome in the community. And so there's a lot of very complex, it's one thing to have this goal, but carrying it out effectively requires some new thinking. And that's why I think the ATI can be, as a consortium, can be so helpful, because you've got people who are smart and they're going to have ideas and they can share those ideas and thereby make everybody more successful.
Oh, thank you, and that's a terrific segue into the next question.
Okay.
If you could comment on the actions that your institutions are taking to recruit, retain, and graduate this population of students.
Sure, I can start. So we've been, I'd say, approaching this from three different directions. I think one is how do we as an institution build our pipelines and connections to attract high schools? I think, as President Kirwan just mentioned, that there are students and schools out there that have never heard of Kenyon, that don't recognize what a private liberal arts college has to offer. And so it's finding and identifying talented students for whom Kenyon might be a good match. So we've done that by strengthening what we call the Kenyon Academic Partnership. It's a network of high schools that offer Kenyon College courses at the high school. And it's a collaboration that's built between high school teachers and faculty members at Kenyon. Right now we have this year about 1,000 high school students who are taking Kenyon courses at their high schools through the CAP partnership. It's a great way for especially students that are in rural school districts, students that are in sort of under-resourced urban school districts to have the opportunity to do college-level work and to also at the same time get connected with Kenyon faculty and in a direct way. Related to that, we've been working to expand then a summer program that brings some of those students to campus to get a college experience while in high school over the summer, so that students can get work with faculty members, live in the dorms, kind of have an opportunity to, again, get a sense of what Kenyon is like, get introduced to the type of environment that we have on campus. We use that as a pipeline to get students to apply. So it's connecting the admissions process to students that have taken these courses or had these experiences. And once they apply, over the course of the past year, we've developed a new program and expanded another program that actually supports the retention of students when they're on campus. So we have what we call the STEM program, which aims to bring low-income students with interest in the sciences to Kenyon. It actually then offers these students an intensive pre-summer program and opportunities to do both research and community-engaged learning early on in their careers to attract and retain students from low-income backgrounds who have interest in the sciences. We have a program called KEEP that is not focused on the sciences, but more broadly, the Kenyon Education Enrichment Program that is open to students outside of the sciences, including some students in the sciences, but a similar intensive mentoring and support for students to make sure that they make that transition to feel comfortable and have an ownership of the Kenyon experience. And then the other piece is how do we make sure that those students are connected to programs and opportunities that can help them be successful after graduation. And so, making sure that students, as we come in, are plugged into whether it's opportunities to study away, opportunities to do undergraduate research, opportunities for internships. It's tied into some of the differences in social capital and experience that students have when they come to campus. And so often students from upper middle class backgrounds come into campus knowing that the first thing you need to do is to figure out how to line up an internship, or what the value is of doing a research experience, or why a study away experience can be transformational, and that sometimes there are just cost barriers to those experiences that, again, upper middle class students sort of just assume that they'll be able to manage, but that feel overwhelming to low income students. Those experiences are incredibly important to make sure that the overall learning and academic experience of students is strong, and it prepares them after graduation. We've been trying to make sure that all of our students recognize that early on from day one, and having programs that lower some of the cost barriers, remove the cost barriers to study away, to doing undergraduate research, to doing an internship, that make those broadly accessible to students, and encouraging talented students to do that regardless of income coming in. So building pipelines to high school, setting up good support for retention on students and expanding our capacity to do that, and then removing the barriers for high impact experiences that help to make the educational program successful after graduation have been the three major things we're focused on.
Great. A couple things that we've done, and all of us, I think, Beth, to your question, the first thing is to attract students to apply, so that recruitment is very important. The second thing is to make sure that we're able to retain those students, and then to help them find a pathway to graduation. We work on a different scale, so many of our programs we're widely known, and that's great. Many of the students who don't apply believe that maybe they don't qualify for the Ohio State University, or how would they succeed here, or how would they pay for it. So we've done a couple of things. One, we've had long-lasting programs throughout the state, things like the Young Scholars Program and others that have been resident in parts of particularly places with poorer performing high schools around the state for decades, offering scholarships and support. In fact, those programs go back to 6th grade with students and their parents, and help to guide them toward the opportunity of going to college. And one of the nicest things that we get to do is tend to do this during the summers, but visit programs, and those who are doing the recruiting for the program are people who are college graduates who were in fact themselves in the program when they were in grade school or middle school, and can say to someone from their neighborhood, here's the opportunity that I had and that you have. And we expanded that program by an additional 15 slots recently. We have a thing that's called Land Grant Opportunity Scholarship, which is great. It's a full scholarship, and there was one made available for every county in the state, so there were 88 of them. They had been reduced at the time of the recession to be, they used to be full scholarships, then they were reduced to just full tuition. Still a nice scholarship, a full tuition scholarship, one in all 88 counties. We resurrected the program and made it that the program is now a full scholarship program. That meant instead of about $10,000 a year, it's more like $26,000 a year, so it's a big bump up. And then we doubled the size of it, so now there are 2 for every county in Ohio, and that's been a popular way of making sure that people there know that if they have the talent and the focus, that economics don't have to be a barrier. We also raised that we have affordability grants that we provide to our middle and lower income students, actually, and truly middle and lower income, because the affordability grants in some cases go up to students whose families make over $100,000 a year, but still the cost of $30,000 for us and more for privates to go to college is more than that family income can support. So we have some help to those students, but particularly we wanted to focus on the students who would qualify for ATI, which means those in the lower half of the income distribution. So as of next year, those students with a combination of Pell Grants and OCOG grants and then university grants will be able to graduate from, or come to and graduate from Ohio State tuition free. We'll make sure that grants cover the cost of tuition for anyone from the lower half of the income distribution in the state. So that's been a big change. And then we work hard to make it known that at least if you're an Ohio student, that tuition isn't a barrier for you, particularly if you're in the lower half of the income distribution, because your tuition will be effectively zero. And we do all those things to try to make sure that as many people who can have an opportunity to attend a university that, like ours, think about that. Once here, and too numerous to count things to do, but a lot of the things that we do are actually more aligned with another program that we're actively involved in called University Innovation Alliance, UIA, and that really is focused on graduation rates, and that looks to narrow achievement gaps to help students get through college and graduate at a high rate. It's really available for all students, but the focus tends to be more on students from high schools that weren't quite as strong or who have backgrounds that might cause them to struggle more. And again, that's another panel, but we could talk about the things that we do to help get those students through. And then really through both UIA and ATI are great things that we monitor our success in all of these things. We actually keep data and look to see how we're doing. And so for Kenyon or for Maryland or for us, when you join the ATI, you have to have a collective impact framework that your school puts forward saying, here's what we think we can do if we put our minds to improving the prospects of these students to be successful. And we have those across our student body, and we are now actively monitoring all the things that we can do to help them to move forward.
Thank you.
Can I mention completion grants? I forgot completion grants too. I want to just make sure that's another really important thing that we began doing, and it's something we learned more from UIA than from an ATI partner. But completion grants are grants that are given to people who are in their last year of study, who are not allowed to register for a financial barrier that can be as small as hundreds of dollars. So they've gone through all of this school. They're maybe thousands of dollars in debt. They're getting near their degree, and they can't register because they're hundreds of dollars short in some particular fee. So we have a special grant program that we use for those particular students. It's a relatively small number, approaching about 100, I think, this year. But there are dramatically different results in students who are able to register for that last semester or those last 2 semesters versus those who drop out for the purpose of working and getting the money and come back. They're several times more likely to graduate if you give them this last little bridge. And so we're very excited about having employed that more actively this last year as well.
Great. Thank you. President Kirwan, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Well, I think this last point that Michael made about completion grants is so important. I was very moved by a story I heard from my undergraduate alma mater, the University of Kentucky. University of Kentucky is not in ATI, but their president, Eli Capilouto, is very concerned about this issue as well. And a year or so ago, in a meeting with the staff, somebody mentioned that there were 3,000 students who had been at the university last year that would not be coming back and had not graduated. And he said, well, why aren't they coming back? And everybody said, well, they probably got dismissed academically. He said, well, I want to know what happened. So they did some research, and they found out that 30% of those students had a 3.0 average. And so that really got his interest. 30% had a 3.0 average. It's almost 1,000 students. And they left. So they did some more research and found out they all had at least $5,000 of unmet need. And it turns out that's a really important number. When unmet need rises to that level, the odds of staying in school go way, way, way down because the option is to take out significant loans. So he started a whole new program at Kentucky. Up until this point, they had distributed 90% of institutional aid based on merit. And he said no more. We're going to, is now 70% of the institutional aid goes based on need. And so, it's one thing to get the students, low income students, into the institution, but then monitoring their financial circumstances while they're at the institution is so important. And that's why these completion grants, Michael, I think are just absolutely essential to the success of this effort.
Right, thank you. You've all mentioned the need for additional funding to support these students. So can you comment on how you are able to find this funding?
There's a question.
Sure. So, this has really been I describe it as a rallying cry for the Kenyan community. Something that the institution is committed to in terms of its internal allocation of resources. So, in making decisions in the budget process, financial aid is prioritized. We recognize that we meet the full financial need of every student, and we've sort of grown the financial aid budget each year, even while other budgets are being held flat, and that's a recognition that that's a place where we need to put resources. So there's an institutional commitment that's critical that recognizes that this is a top priority and a place that we need to put resources. I think, though, more importantly, there's a broader rallying cry for I'd say friends of the institution and supporters of the institution. As we're moving into a fundraising campaign, as I'm sure my colleagues will know, that we're always in the middle of a fundraising campaign at some point in time. But I'd say that the need to raise money for financial aid is something that is just universally heard, and it's been a very powerful resonance with our donors. ATI has been an important part of that because it's also very helpful and powerful to say that it's a Kenyan issue, but it's a national issue, and we're moving with peer institutions to move forward. And I'll just highlight sort of two fundraising initiatives that to me have been both inspirational and have been quite powerful. One is an effort to create a fund that's specifically targeted at exactly the types of students that the ATI program is aimed at, and it's a group of donors who have rallied together on a sort of a mini campaign within a campaign to raise $20 million in endowment to commit to basically ATI students to come to Kenyon, which we're really excited about. And another program where a donor realizes that this has to be a collective movement by members of the community, and so is actually matching one-to-one gifts to create new scholarship funds, right? And which has been a great inspiration of folks to come on board. And so, I'd say the combination of those things, the rallying cry that this is an important issue means that internally we've been able to reallocate resources towards financial aid very effectively, but it's also been a way for us to attract resources from the outside, which is very important.
And I think the same things. Importantly, we are always pleased to be supported by our philanthropic community, and we have specific conversations about ways that we can help that community support scholarships and to do more and more of that. We've made a reallocation from merit-based to need-based aid. We move it every year. And then we also undertook a program to look at administrative savings and to try to find ways, particularly from the central administration, that we were spending money and not getting great value. And we thought the best thing we could do is to stop spending that money and to give that money directly to students and their families at the beginning. And what we committed to do, in fact, to make sure that we did that, is that we committed the money to the students and their families before we had achieved the administrative savings. So we committed to say, this is how much money we're going to give our students, increase the money we'll give our students next year. Now we need to find out ways to save that. First year, actually, we saved a little bit more, as I was expecting we would. We saved a little bit more than we thought we were going to be able to, and more than we had promised. And so the first year we increased need-based aid by $15 million. The next year by $20 million. The year after that by $25. And this coming year we'll have an increase of $40 million of need-based aid, more than we had 4 years ago. And that is just by making sure that we're as efficient. Well, great. and thank you, but what it was to do is to make sure we were as efficient as we can be in what we spend, so that we don't waste money being inefficient and sloppy, where we could be investing that money into the futures of our students and help our students and their families. So it's a very, very important thing to do, but it requires a commitment from everyone, and I'm pleased to have the entire community join in that.
Great, that's great. Thank you.
I just add,
Please.
I think this kind of an initiative is very appealing to wealthy alumni. So many of them, I know from my experience here and at Maryland, started from modest means and went on to have great success. And so I think an appeal focused on need-based aid for low-income students can be appealed. So I think there's a significant potential for fundraising to support this initiative. As we've seen, we had at the University of Maryland a very successful alum who started from very modest means, who didn't have enough money to ride the bus to come to a school when he was a student. He had to hitchhike on many days. Left us an enormous gift, 100 million of which was a matching fund for need-based aid for students. So I think if this becomes a target in fundraising efforts, as it obviously is at these two institutions, I think a lot of good can come from that. But I think that the basic question here is one that is a great dilemma for our nation, because the need is so great. I'm enormously proud of what modest role I played in ATI. But at the end of the day, they're talking about 50,000 low-income students, and the need is many times more than that. We have to lift multiples of that, help lift these people out of poverty. How is our country going to pay for this? It isn't going to come through tuition. These students can't afford tuition. For public institutions, are we going to see a huge investment from the states to support this initiative? Does anybody think money is going to start rolling in from our states back to our institutions? I don't want to bank on that. Certainly not in the intermediate term. So I think this is a huge dilemma for our universities and our nation. How are we going to find the funds? I think ATI can be very successful because these are successful and wealthy, relatively wealthy institutions. I know many days you don't feel wealthy, but here at Ohio State, when the state cuts your budget, but how are we as a nation going to address this problem? This is larger than just ATI, and it's honestly something, I mean this sincerely, that keeps me up at night. Thinking about the world my children and grandchildren are going to live in if we don't find a way to provide much more equitable access to higher education.
Maybe
Thank you.
let me say, I know it's going to be time for questions from the audience in a minute, but I want to say something maybe to help Brit sleep
Okay.
Better, because we mentioned ATI, great initiatives and things that we can do, and I mentioned earlier that's 9% of the universities. I mentioned University Innovation Alliance. That's another collection of now 11 universities, research universities, public universities, many state universities. Arizona State would be the leader of that, but Oregon State, University of Kansas, Michigan State, Georgia State, and several others are with us as a part of that. And then I mentioned that other organizations like APLU, Association of Public and Land Grant Universities. And if I mention those three, just using acronyms, ATI, UIA, APLU, there are programs in each of them that are meant to help universities attract students and then, really importantly, help those students to be successful. One of the things I believe we can do most in helping more people to be educated, with our cost structure not changing as much as it might, is to help the students find a pathway through to graduation on time, get higher degree completion rates, and honestly leaving with fewer excess units than is the norm for our students. Now, many find a circuitous pathway through that's costly for them and for us, and at the end of the day, you have the same 1 degree that you were going to have. And so as we are looking at things, particularly with now UIA, at how to make the pathway of students through our universities more successful and having a shorter time to degree, that's decreasing the cost of education for them. And then with our physical plant, it actually increases the utility of our institutions because more people can move through. I love and admire 5th and 6th year students, and I want to just make sure I use the term love and admire for all 5th and 6th year students for whatever reason. But as we have fewer 5th and 6th year students, we can have more 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year students. And so our population doesn't change in size. People are just moving through at a little bit faster rates, like the traffic on the freeway moving a little bit faster. You get more cars in the same road space. And that's better for the students and then better for us and increases our capacity. So one of the ways that we believe we can afford to do more within a constrained budget is to make it that we're as efficient as we can be in what we can do.
You know, Michael, you mentioned about your commencement, your student speakers at the commencement. I think another way in which we can make achieving a college degree more affordable and is by a stronger partnership between the 4-year institutions and the 2-year institutions, so that students really can start at a 2-year school, come to a 4-year institution to get a degree, and not lose any credits. I mean, so having that seamless transfer from the 2-year sector into the 4-year sector, and that's something I think we need to see more of around the country, this collaboration and partnership between these two sectors, so that students can have a seamless pathway to a 4-year degree.
That's great. Perhaps this is a good time to transition to opening up to general questions, but first I'd just like to thank you all for your thoughtful comments and responses to the questions.
Thank you very much.
Good. Any questions? And we do have a microphone that will be delivered.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel Todd. I'm representing Honors and Scholars as well as the College of Engineering. One of the things that was said was that campus needs to think about how we can make a more welcoming environment for low-income students. So what are some specific ideas or suggestions that you would like to see implemented? Thank you.
I'll make a comment. I mean, and I will say lower and moderate are the terms that I use. So lower and moderate income students, and also transfer students. And you know, there's I'll show my age actively when I used to use the analogy of Adobe Gillis sort of college. Got a couple of chuckles from the retired people in the audience, but the sort of traditional 18 to 22-year-old start as a freshman, go through and graduate college student is the picture that's in many minds. And most of the people who are enrolled in higher education institutions today are not in that demographic and a 4-year institution graduating in 4 years. There are many millions of students who are in 2-year institutions and taking other pathways. And so it's the demographic is much more diverse than it had been. And when we have things kind of set up for in our Welcome Week and all the different programs that we have with the 18-year-old first-time freshman in mind, it is not as easy for students who come in who are transfer students or students who've been in the military or who have families, a variety of other things, students who are the first in their family ever to go to college versus someone who's a third-generation Buckeye or a third generation in the same Greek house. And so we have to be very active and intentional in reaching out to those students to both encourage them to take advantage of things that are here on campus and then to help us in providing the programs and opportunities for them to be more involved. We have orientations and we have freshman orientation and transfer orientation. We'll start those in about a week and a half. We have a lot of students coming in. I participate in both. I have a different message to the transfer students generally than I do to the freshmen. But we want to do everything we can to reach out to students who are coming in to make sure that they have a chance to be involved. And part of what I mentioned, changing our graduation program to include a specific focus on students that come from, again, not the sort of traditional multi-generational background that might have been seen more commonly in the past. We want to make sure we recognize them in all aspects of what we're doing in our university and make sure to keep those people who we might not see otherwise top of mind.
Now, and I would add on to that, I sort of see this, the challenges here falling into two categories, and I'd maybe label them the hard and the very hard work for us to do. The hard work is identifying those things that are cost barriers or time barriers to students when they're on campus. And that ranges, I think the first step is to really do a self-examination of an institution to identify what those things are and to figure out how to remove them. And some of them are obvious. So, we've had sort of recognized that, for example, some of our courses, especially courses in the arts that may have extra expenses for art supplies or music lessons, or those things are barriers to students being able to take and explore those parts of the curriculum. Some of them are a little bit more hidden in realizing that there might be fees or penalties, places where we use monetary penalties as a way to enforce relatively trivial rules that have a disproportionate impact on students for whom $15 really matters compared to students for whom $15 doesn't matter, and how do we address those issues? Issues about expectations of time for students that have to work while they're on campus. Right? So the assumption that everyone is going to have, a band of time free in the evening may not be true for students who have obligations to work. So it's being aware and trying to dismantle some of those. And I think what we found is important is to talk to and listen to students, to identify where those things are, and to try to do what we can to take apart and dismantle those barriers when we find them. I'd say, so that's the hard work. The very hard work is much more cultural about how the dynamic of campus and the social dynamic of campus. And that's the place where, are we really building a community where everyone feels like they belong in the same way? And there are many signals that are given out by a campus that makes it more attractive and welcoming to students who are, from multi-generational families going to college, in some cases in a place like Kenyon, multiple generations who've gone to Kenyon, that really do send signals that some students belong more than others. That there's the notion of how do you get members of a community to talk to each other across difference, including across class difference, and that's one of the things that is, it's sort of still a very hard thing to talk about in any setting, but I'd say particularly on a college campus, where talking about the fact that there are different perspectives on things that come from socioeconomic class is easy to talk about in the abstract, very difficult to talk about when you're thinking about building relationships within a community. That's work that I think we all have to do as well, and that's much harder work. In many ways, I think it's also critical work, though, because if we manage to not only bring diverse students, including socioeconomically diverse students, to a college campus and build the type of community where we overcome some of those barriers, the citizens that we graduate on the other end are going to be change agents in their own community, and that's our larger goal. So I think we have to dismantle the barriers that we identify that are easy to dismantle, and then we also have to work towards that broader cultural change to build a truly inclusive community.
All right, thank you. Is there another question?
There's one back up
There's,
So Dr. Drake sort of hinted to this where you started talking about transfer students. Most of the pipeline talk that you mentioned seems to identify first-year students, high school, fertile grounds like that. If you're going to make a dent in the number that Dr. Kirwan referred to, it sounds like you'll need every
Yeah, so I mean, we don't have time to say everything, but of course. I mean, I can just say of course. So it couldn't work if we didn't do that. So that's a primary focus of the initiative. But I'll be specific. Last night's, we have a monthly steering committee call, and last night's call focused, one of the areas on our agenda was community college transfer specifically, and how to enhance and increase those programs. We here are a leader in that. We have 1,000 students a year that come from Columbus State alone. So we have a very, very active program with students from Columbus State taking courses here or that are for credit here in an active way, and then coming 1,000 a year. And on Sunday, when we have graduation, we will have thousands of students who will be leaving who were not freshmen at Ohio State who will be graduating. So that's something we're very pleased and proud about, and initial, very important. We also have regional campuses, and our regional campuses have students who transition to us, and that's a very important part of making sure that we can reach broadly to communities, particularly rural and lower income communities which might not have as much access to the Ohio State at the very beginning. One of the 60 Minutes last week, last Sunday night, had a segment that featured UIA and ATI, although it didn't speak of ATI by name. Chris Eisgruber from Princeton and some of his students were featured in the long segment with Scott Pelley, talking about the program of making more opportunities available to lower and middle income students. And one of the things that has happened, interestingly, is Princeton traditionally didn't take transfer students. That was just one of their transfer students, but they were Princeton. But now, actually, they have an active program in looking to begin to take transfer students. And as many others, again, we've been doing for many years, and others have been doing it for many years, but they were looking at this as an additional way to open their opportunity to students who might not have started with the traditional background. And going to Brit's point, and the point you made in your question, this is we don't have enough people who are gaining a college degree broadly in the United States, and we need and again in the 60 Minutes segment, I think that Bill Gates said that there was to be a gap of about 10 million college degrees. I'm going to forget the year, by 2020 or 2025, a huge gap in the workforce for people, a need for people with college degrees where we didn't have the workforce to do that. And so the only way to do that is to really reach broadly out. ATI one piece, but all of the other efforts significant, really important as well. And we'll say something else. Not everyone is in ATI. ATI was based on a specific research paradigm and focused on particularly high-performing universities. What we hope and see is that things that work in one particular group actually work for other colleges and universities as well. And the idea is that through the interest in the collective good or competitiveness, or however you want to see it, that as there are good ideas, that people continue to adopt those across the sector and raise the success and completion rates in all of our colleges and universities, and by that have a much larger effect.
Great. I think we have time for one quick question. Yes.
How can faculty get involved? You talked about administrative actions, but what are some ways that you're encouraging your faculty to
Great.
support these initiatives?
Well, I'd love to be a great host and let everyone else talk, but let me just say something I want to. But sometimes you don't get what you want, right? So, critically important for everyone, but I'll speak about us here. Critically important for our university to do the best job it can do of providing high-quality education in a way that's most likely to be successful for the students. And that's particularly important for students who are first generation or come from high schools that maybe didn't prepare them as well. Studies piled this high would show us that great teaching, everybody does better with great teaching, but particularly students who are on the edge or on the margin can succeed with great teaching and not succeed if the teaching is not good. And so we want to, and we have a University Institute for Teaching and Learning that we started a couple of years ago for the purpose of helping all of our faculty improve their teaching and improve the teaching outcomes that our students would achieve. Two reasons for that. One is to increase our graduation rate overall, but the other is to narrow the achievement gap. And I will just reemphasize how much of a real difference this makes for students who come in not sure of their background They're not the sons and daughters of faculty members like my kids were, but they're kids who are the first to do this in their family. And having outstanding teaching that focuses on them and doesn't just put a barrier to succeeding is really important. I will say that, a pat on the back to the faculty at this university. We were last year ranked by U.S. News, and which I only quote rarely, but I usually say that I don't like their methods. This time they got it right, so I want to applaud and congratulate them and say they may be, okay. But we were ranked 17 among all colleges and universities in commitment to undergraduate teaching, and 8th among public colleges and universities in undergraduate teaching. So I'm very proud of the work that our faculty does. But I also want to say that being ranked either 17th or 8th, I want the faculty to feel that being ranked 17th or 8th in those categories in undergraduate teaching, we'd feel like that, like we feel if we're ranked 17th or 8th in football. Unacceptable. You know, we have one place we want to be, and that's at the very top. And I'm really excited at the enthusiasm that the faculty show in coming together and doing everything they can to make a program that's already outstanding even better.
Can I? Oh.
Go ahead, please.
Sort of to echo President Drake's comments. You know, one of the projects that I'm really proud of at Kenyon that was begun by our science faculty was doing a very rigorous inventory of student success through the introductory science courses and progressing towards graduation, and recognizing that at least I think the initial hypothesis anecdotally were that low-income and underrepresented students were actually, upon admission, disproportionately high interest in the sciences, and then upon graduation seemed to disappear in the pipeline. It was a very rigorous and brave study, in part because it required faculty to take a look at their own classes and then to actually share that data with colleagues about what was working, what was not working, and what classes were issues and challenges and what weren't. And that led to a successful proposal to the Howard Hughes Medical Institute for a large pedagogical reform effort throughout the natural sciences at Kenyon that's aimed at bringing inclusive pedagogy across the board to the science courses. So that was an exciting piece. I'd say the coolest part of that project, though, is that part of the proposal and the initiative is that the faculty have committed to make inclusive pedagogical methods part of the evaluation process for faculty moving forward in the sciences. And so the idea was, not only is this something that we're going to say is a priority in terms of changing our curriculum, but we think it's so important that we're also going to insist that this is something that's part of evaluation moving forward, which to me is the sign that it will actually be institutionalized, because I think I was a provost once, and it's kind of, if you don't actually have it as part of the evaluation system, we know that it's hard to sustain in the long term.
I know we're out of time, but just
Right.
one real quick
Absolutely.
comment. I loved hearing what's happening both at Kenyon and Ohio State. That's just absolutely fabulous. But I want to say there's also a huge role for the staff in making this a successful initiative. And, you know, the poster child for me on this is, and you referenced them, Georgia State University, that used very sophisticated data analytics to understand students' pathways through the institution and dropping out, unfortunately. And they put in they were a leader in creating some very intentional, just-in-time advising strategies. And these advisors made a huge difference in the success of these students. They actually increased their completion rate. They're serving an open admission institution, serving lots of the very kinds of students we've been talking about. They increased their completion rate from 40% to 60%, primarily through getting to the students with the right kind of advice at the right time, and the staff were just absolutely essential to that success.
Thank you very much. I think
Well, predictably, our time has run out before the questions have run out, and certainly before the important topics have been thoroughly discussed. Join me in thanking our panel one more time for a really terrific, informative questions. And thank you all for coming.
Great. Thank you all.